Maybe you're lying in bed right now, lights dimmed, phone in your hand, waiting for one last story before sleep. Well, tonight, I want to take you somewhere far away, back into a time wrapped in fog and silence. A time before England was even called England. Let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered who truly built the kingdom we now call Britain? Not just ruled it, but forged it from fragments, from chaos, from rival kings who dreamed of power. Most people would name William the Conqueror, or maybe Alfred the Great. But what if I told you neither of them wore the first true English crown? That title belongs to a man the world has almost forgotten, Æthelstan. He reigned from 924 to 939, a name carved faintly into the stones of history, yet his influence echoes through every chapter that followed. Æthelstan, the first king of England, a man who united the anglo-saxon kingdoms into one realm. But behind the polished image of a unifier lies something darker. Whispers of forbidden alliances, cryptic relics, secret pacts, and a mysterious silence surrounding his rise. How did he seize so much power, so quickly, and with such divine precision? And what truths did he bury along the way? Tonight, we'll travel together through that mist, tracing the footsteps of a man who may have been chosen by fate, or something far more mysterious. So, are you ready?
Then take a deep breath. Let's begin.
Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the mist of early England rolling over damp fields where the morning sun struggles to break through the fog. In that haze, somewhere beyond the whispers of war and the cries of ravens, a young prince was rising. His name was Æthelstan. Few could guess that this quiet boy, born from uncertain bloodlines, would become the first to call himself King of the English. Yet even now, historians debate how he truly came to power, and what shadows walked beside him on his climb to the throne. Æthelstan was born into a fractured world, the grandson of Alfred the Great, but his own claim to the throne wasn't so clear. His mother's identity was shrouded in mystery. Some called her a noblewoman, others whispered she was a concubine. In a time obsessed with bloodlines and divine right, that rumor could have destroyed him. But somehow, fate, or something beyond human understanding, seemed to guard his path. Old writings mention a dream his grandfather once had, a vision of a golden cross hovering over Æthelstan's cradle, foretelling a ruler who would unite all English lands. Coincidence or prophecy? As a boy, Æthelstan was gifted a magnificent sword, said to be the same weapon once wielded by the hero Beowulf himself. Whether that's truth or legend doesn't matter anymore. What matters is how the people believed it. To them, it was a sign, a chosen one, armed with a weapon of myth. When his father, King Edward the Elder, died, England fell into chaos. Rival kings emerged, half-brothers plotted in silence, and the kingdom cracked along its old tribal lines. Yet, through cunning diplomacy and relentless resolve, Æthelstan claimed what was his. He didn't seize power with brute force, not at first. He united it through faith, symbols, and the idea that he was chosen by God himself. Still, peace in early England was like mist, fleeting, impossible to hold. There were whispers that Æthelstan's rise wasn't as pure as it seemed. Some claimed a secret order of monks supported him, guided by visions and ancient prophecies. Others said he struck hidden deals with Viking warlords, paying in gold and silence to buy time. And in the quiet of the abbeys, scribes left strange notes, half erased, half preserved, hinting at forbidden rituals before his coronation. Was it ceremony, or something older, darker, and long forgotten? When Æthelstan was finally crowned in 924, witnesses described the sky as unnaturally bright, though the morning had begun with heavy clouds. Chronicles tell of birds flying in perfect circles above the cathedral, a sign, they said, that heaven itself approved his rule. But those same records go eerily silent about what happened inside that coronation hall. The doors were shut for hours. No servant was allowed to enter. And when they opened, Æthelstan emerged, pale, trembling, and crowned in gold. He said nothing, only smiled, as though he'd seen something the world was not meant to know. So began the reign of England's first true king, a reign that would shape centuries, but one born in silence, prophecy, and the mist of unanswered questions. Long before Æthelstan wore the crown, the royal bloodline of Wessex lived under the weight of a prophecy. A whisper that passed from monk to monk, candle to candle, deep within stone abbeys where light struggled to reach the walls. The story claimed that one descendant of Alfred the Great would bind the island under one cross and one name. But prophecies, as history teaches us, are double-edged. They bless one soul and curse another. The prophecy's roots began with a vision, or so the monks said. In the twilight years of Alfred's life, he was seen wandering through the royal chapel, sleepless and trembling. He told his scribe that in a dream he saw a child holding a sword made of flame, surrounded by shadows shaped like crowns. "The child will bring peace," Alfred wrote, "but peace that walks upon ashes." For years, his words were locked away in the Abbey of Winchester, hidden behind coded Latin verses no one dared to translate fully. When Æthelstan was born, however, the old scribe stirred again, whispering that the child matched Alfred's vision exactly. The boy's eyes, they said, shone like embers in moonlight. Centuries later, fragments of the Winchester prophecy were discovered, torn and burned at the edges. They spoke of 7 signs that would mark the true king: a falcon's cry over his cradle, a blade from the north, blood of a rival kin, a crown forged twice, the fall of 5 kings, a storm before dawn, and a voice from the heavens. Historians try to explain it away as poetic symbolism, but many details curiously align with Æthelstan's life. A falcon was reportedly seen circling over his birthplace. His sword came from Mercia, a northern gift. His ascension followed the fall of 5 regional kings, coincidence or fate, scripting its plan through bloodlines. Not everyone saw the prophecy as divine. Some feared it. When Æthelstan's father, Edward the Elder, heard the whispers, he grew wary of his son's growing legend. Rival lords began to plot, hoping to stop the child of flame before destiny fulfilled itself. Rumors claim Edward even sought to send Æthelstan away to Mercia, not to protect him, but to keep him from the throne. Yet that act, ironically, fulfilled another part of the prophecy. He shall walk as a stranger among kin, but return as king. In Mercia, Æthelstan was trained by a warrior queen, Æthelfled, who taught him both the sword and the scriptures. She believed the prophecy and prepared him for it. By the time Æthelstan returned to Wessex, the prophecy was no longer secret. It had become a fire that burned through the minds of nobles and commoners alike. Some worshipped him as the chosen one, others feared he would bring the destruction the verses warned about. On the night before his coronation, monks reported a violent storm tearing through Winchester. Thunder split the sky like divine judgment. Yet at midnight, as the storm broke, witnesses said a single beam of moonlight pierced the abbey window and fell directly upon the crown, resting untouched on the altar. Whether it was fate, divine will, or coincidence, no one could say. But from that night on, the people of Wessex no longer doubted the prophecy. They believed Aethelstan's rise was written long before his birth, and that his reign would either unite England forever or awaken something far older that slept beneath it. Long before Æthelstan wore the crown, the royal bloodline of Wessex lived under the weight of a prophecy. A whisper that passed from monk to monk, candle to candle, deep within stone abbeys where light struggled to reach the walls. The story claimed that one descendant of Alfred the Great would bind the island under one cross and one name. But prophecies, as history teaches us, are double-edged. They bless one soul and curse another. The prophecy's roots began with a vision, or so the monks said. In the twilight years of Alfred's life, he was seen wandering through the royal chapel, sleepless and trembling. He told his scribe that in a dream he saw a child holding a sword made of flame, surrounded by shadows shaped like crowns. "The child will bring peace," Alfred wrote, "but peace that walks upon ashes." For years, his words were locked away in the Abbey of Winchester, hidden behind coded Latin verses no one dared to translate fully. When Æthelstan was born, however, the old scribe stirred again, whispering that the child matched Alfred's vision exactly. The boy's eyes, they said, shone like embers in moonlight. Centuries later, fragments of the Winchester prophecy were discovered, torn and burned at the edges. They spoke of 7 signs that would mark the true king: a falcon's cry over his cradle, a blade from the north, blood of a rival kin, a crown forged twice, the fall of 5 kings, a storm before dawn, and a voice from the heavens. Historians try to explain it away as poetic symbolism, but many details curiously align with Æthelstan's life. A falcon was reportedly seen circling over his birthplace. His sword came from Mercia, a northern gift. His ascension followed the fall of 5 regional kings, coincidence or fate, scripting its plan through bloodlines. Not everyone saw the prophecy as divine. Some feared it. When Æthelstan's father, Edward the Elder, heard the whispers, he grew wary of his son's growing legend. Rival lords began to plot, hoping to stop the child of flame before destiny fulfilled itself. Rumors claim Edward even sought to send Æthelstan away to Mercia, not to protect him, but to keep him from the throne. Yet that act, ironically, fulfilled another part of the prophecy. He shall walk as a stranger among kin, but return as king. In Mercia, Æthelstan was trained by a warrior queen, Æthelfled, who taught him both the sword and the scriptures. She believed the prophecy and prepared him for it. By the time Æthelstan returned to Wessex, the prophecy was no longer secret. It had become a fire that burned through the minds of nobles and commoners alike. Some worshipped him as the chosen one, others feared he would bring the destruction the verses warned about. On the night before his coronation, monks reported a violent storm tearing through Winchester. Thunder split the sky like divine judgment. Yet, at midnight, as the storm broke, witnesses said a single beam of moonlight pierced the abbey window and fell directly upon the crown, resting untouched on the altar. Whether it was fate, divine will, or coincidence, no one could say. But from that night on, the people of Wessex no longer doubted the prophecy. They believed Æthelstan's rise was written long before his birth, and that his reign would either unite England forever or awaken something far older that slept beneath it. The path to a crown is never a straight line, and for Æthelstan the journey back to Wessex was paved with whispers, steel, and hidden schemes. Imagine the hills and rivers of England shrouded in fog as noblemen, warriors, and mercenaries watched from the shadows. Some were eager to welcome him, some eager to strike him down before he even set foot in the royal halls. The battle for the crown was not just fought with swords, it was fought in minds, hearts, and alliances forged in secrecy. Not every hand that reached out to Æthelstan sought gold or glory. Some sought survival, and in doing so became his most loyal allies. Among them were distant cousins and even former rivals, each with their own reasons to support the young prince. Mercian lords, still loyal to Æthelflaed's memory, offered him soldiers and safe passage. Viking chieftains, surprisingly, extended temporary truces, recognizing the power a unified England could bring, or perhaps seeing a chance to trade for their own gain. Æthelstan learned quickly. Allies are rarely generous out of goodwill. They are investments, as delicate and dangerous as the weapons he carried. Yet for every hand extended, there was a dagger waiting. Half-brothers, distant relatives, and ambitious nobles watched his every move, their eyes cold with envy. Some attempted secret assassinations, sending messengers with poisoned letters or claiming accidents as fate. Æthelstan survived each attempt, sometimes by chance, sometimes by his growing instinct for danger. The chronicles hint at nights spent sleepless, patrolling corridors of castles, listening to whispers and rustles that might signal death itself. To gain the crown, he learned, one must not only fight openly but also navigate a labyrinth of hidden threats that no army could confront. Power, Æthelstan realized, came at a cost heavier than any sword. The loyalty of friends could be fleeting. The trust of a kingdom could shatter like glass under pressure. Every victory required a calculated sacrifice, some moral, some personal. To unite England, he had to make decisions that left scars, both visible and invisible. Villages loyal to other kings were subdued. Lands changed hands quietly in the night. Æthelstan's mind was a battlefield. Every thought weighed with the lives of men, women, and children whose fates hung in the balance. And yet, despite the shadows, despite the constant threat of betrayal, the young prince pressed forward, guided by prophecy, strategy, and a quiet, unshakable determination. When the day finally came, and Æthelstan's foot stepped into Wessex as a rightful heir, the crown was more than gold and jewels. It was a symbol carved from struggle, shadow, and silent victories. The mist that had followed him seemed to lift slightly, revealing a kingdom that trembled, ready for change. Allies rejoiced, rivals bowed, or retreated into the shadows, and the first threads of a united England began to take shape. But beneath the surface, hidden in silent corners and unspoken oaths, Æthelstan knew that the true battle had only just begun. For a king might claim a crown, but holding the hearts, minds, and loyalty of an entire island, that was a different war altogether. Imagine a dimly lit hall in Winchester, candles flickering and shadows dancing along the stone walls. Æthelstan sat at the head of a long oak table, his eyes scanning the faces around him. Nobles, monks, warriors, each one brought secrets, ambitions, and fears. But what the public never saw were the meetings that happened behind closed doors, councils where whispers carried as much power as the king's own decrees. These hidden councils were the invisible backbone of Æthelstan's reign, and in them the true story of England's first king began to unfold. Some say Æthelstan's advisors were handpicked not just for loyalty, but for knowledge of things most people dared not speak aloud: foreign threats, hidden alliances, even ancient prophecies. Among them were scholars who could read the Old Norse and Latin chronicles, spies disguised as merchants, and monks who claimed to interpret divine will. Together they formed a secret web, a silent council that guided Æthelstan's decisions while the world saw only a confident, unshakable king. In every council meeting, strategy mixed with subtle intimidation, advice was a currency as fragile as glass. The king's councils were not only about defense or diplomacy, they shaped laws, settled disputes, and quietly determined the fates of entire regions. When a rebellious noble threatened the borders of Mercia, the council debated in secrecy, choosing whether to negotiate, bribe, or crush the threat with a silent army. Every decision was a thread in a tapestry of power, designed to consolidate Æthelstan's hold on England. Yet, even within these walls, not everyone could be trusted. Spies whispered rumors, nobles schemed, and the king had to discern truth from deception, a skill that would define his reign for decades. Secrecy, however, came with its own dangers. Some say Æthelstan's councils sometimes performed rituals or invoked symbolic gestures unseen by common eyes to cement loyalty or send subtle warnings. Monks recorded cryptic notes about meetings that sealed fates and called the storm, hints that power was as much about perception as action. The king understood that the people of England would follow only what they could see, hear, and believe, while the real threads of control moved silently, guided by whispers in hidden halls. Through these hidden councils, Æthelstan began to turn a fragile alliance of kingdoms into a unified realm. Every law he passed, every envoy he sent, every battle he fought, carried the imprint of decisions made in shadowed rooms. England, his first true king, understood a truth as old as power itself. To hold a kingdom together, one must be seen as strong, but also move in ways that no one can fully trace. And so the king of a united England became not just a ruler, but a master of secrets. A man whose reign was written in whispers as much as in chronicles, a ruler whose story would echo in mystery for centuries to come. Close your eyes and picture Æthelstan standing on a windswept hill, the mist curling around his boots. Beyond the horizon, rival kings and foreign lords waited, each watching, each calculating. But Æthelstan didn't charge with armies first. No, he moved with the quiet precision of a shadow, choosing his battles not only with steel, but with words, gestures, and subtle agreements that history barely remembers. For in the 10th century, diplomacy was an invisible battlefield, and Æthelstan was learning its secrets. Some of his most dangerous dealings happened far from the eyes of his subjects. Messengers traveled in the dead of night, carrying letters sealed with codes only a few could read. Vikings, once enemies who had terrorized the northern coasts, became uneasy allies, lured by gold, promise, or shared interest against rival kings. Mercia, Northumbria, and Wessex were stitched together not only by conquest, but by the careful weaving of pacts and promises. Each agreement was a delicate balance where one misstep could spark rebellion or war. Æthelstan understood that an ally today could become an enemy tomorrow, and he treated every shadowed negotiation as if the fate of his kingdom depended on it. Because it did. The records hint at mysterious oaths and clandestine meetings. Monks described secret councils held under the cover of night, where Æthelstan and his advisors debated the fates of distant lands. Some treaties were written in obscure runes, others in Latin verse designed to confuse outsiders. There are even whispers that Æthelstan used hostages, not only as leverage, but as symbols of trust, carefully exchanged to cement alliances. Every decision was a silent dance, One wrong move could undo years of planning, yet when executed correctly, it could make the young king seem unstoppable. Yet even with these carefully crafted alliances, Æthelstan's enemies never rested. Some were within his own court, ambitious lords who plotted to twist his diplomatic successes into failures. Others were distant kings, Viking chieftains, and foreign rulers who tested him constantly, probing for weakness. But Æthelstan's brilliance lay in perception. He made every ally feel valued, every enemy underestimated, and every negotiation an art of subtle dominance. By the time his northern treaties were secured and rival factions silenced, Æthelstan had not only built loyalty, but also cultivated fear, an unseen force that strengthened his hold over England. By blending diplomacy with mystery, Æthelstan transformed fragile alliances into a foundation for a united England. His reign became not just a tale of battles won on the field, but a story of silent victories in candlelit chambers, of whispers that carried more weight than swords. And so the young king who once trained under a warrior queen now commanded not only armies, but the quiet obedience of an entire island, a king whose strength was measured as much in shadows as in sunlight. In the hidden corridors of power, Æthelstan proved one truth. The greatest ruler is often the one whose hand is never fully seen. Picture the northern seas, grey and restless, waves crashing against jagged cliffs, the cries of seagulls mixing with the wind. Across these waters came the Vikings, fierce warriors and raiders who had long haunted the coasts of England. But Æthelstan, now a king with ambitions larger than a single kingdom, did something unexpected. Instead of facing them only with swords and shields, he reached out with hands of negotiation, gold, and subtle intimidation. The alliance he forged with these northern warriors would shape his reign, and it was a pact wrapped in mystery and fear. Gold, they say, can buy loyalty, but rarely trust. Æthelstan sent treasures north, silver, finely crafted weapons, and even land in exchange for quiet coasts and safe borders. But these gifts were never simple bribes. They were messages, carefully calculated signals to Viking leaders. Respect the crown, and you may thrive. Defy it, and ruin will follow. Chroniclers hint that some gifts were accompanied by cryptic letters, warnings encoded in old runes, understood only by the recipient and his trusted advisors. The king's strategy relied on the fear and respect of his enemies, creating a delicate balance where power was shared yet controlled. These Viking alliances were not mere temporary truces. Some chieftains swore oaths of loyalty, attending Æthelstan's councils and pledging to support his ambitions against rival kings. But the secrecy of these arrangements was paramount. Meetings often took place in the dead of night, far from the eyes of Wessex and Mercia. Observers later noted that Æthelstan's diplomats used subtle rituals to seal these pacts. Symbolic gestures, exchanged hostages, and even oaths sworn on sacred relics. In public, the Vikings were raiders. In private, they were partners in a silent network of power. Æthelstan had learned that the most dangerous alliances are those no one truly sees forming. Yet fear alone would never hold a pack together. Æthelstan understood the psychology of intimidation. He celebrated Viking victories over minor rebellions, quietly letting the message spread that defiance against him would meet an unstoppable response. At the same time, he ensured that loyalty brought rewards, lands, wealth, and influence. This careful balancing act created an invisible cord binding England and the northern territories, one that few dared sever. Even centuries later, historians marvel at how a young king managed to bend these fierce raiders to his will without spilling rivers of unnecessary blood. By the time Æthelstan solidified his northern alliances, he was no longer just a king of Wessex or Mercia. He was a ruler whose influence stretched across the islands, a master of diplomacy, fear, and subtlety. The Vikings, once a threat looming on the horizon, became instruments of stability and power, a testament to Æthelstan's uncanny ability to see the unseen, to shape the course of a kingdom not through brute force alone, but through strategy, calculation, and a touch of mystery. In the shadows of England's northern coasts, a king had transformed danger into a weapon, and enemies into allies, forever shaping the path to a united kingdom. Close your eyes and imagine the rolling hills of 10th century England, cloaked in mist, where hidden armies move quietly under the cover of night. In these shadowed lands, rival kings plotted and schemed, each believing themselves destined for glory. But Æthelstan was no ordinary prince. He moved with a patience that masked deadly precision. His rise to power was not simply through diplomacy or alliances. It was a careful orchestration of betrayals, calculated strikes, and the silencing of those who dared stand in his way. Even before stepping fully into his kingship, Æthelstan faced family rivalries. Half-brothers and distant cousins saw him as a threat to their ambitions. Some plotted in secret, sending messages that promised loyalty while secretly plotting his downfall. Others attempted more direct acts, ambushes along roads, poisoned feasts, and whispered lies intended to turn allies against him. Yet the young king learned quickly. Knowledge was as powerful as a sword. He listened, observed, and struck only when necessary, letting the shadows do much of his work for him. Every betrayal he foiled became a lesson, sharpening his instincts for the brutal realities of kingship. Not all his victories were fought openly. Many rival kings fell quietly, defeated by cunning rather than armies. Some chronicles hint at strategic marriages, secret pacts, and even deliberate famine to weaken adversaries before a confrontation. Æthelstan's approach to power was almost surgical. He cut only what he needed to and left the rest intact, ensuring loyalty or fear in the aftermath. By the time open battles erupted, his enemies were already weakened, their forces divided, and morale shattered. In this way, Æthelstan transformed what could have been a bloody war into a disciplined march toward domination. Yet even in secrecy, blood had to be shed. Some rivals met their end on the battlefield, others disappeared into history, their fates never fully recorded. Chronicles speak of kings and nobles vanishing or falling in disgrace, but rarely provide details. Were they executed, exiled, or forced to swear allegiance in secret? The ambiguity adds a layer of mystery to Æthelstan's rise, a king whose methods were as calculated as they were concealed. These unseen acts of power, while hidden from public record, sent ripples of fear across the kingdoms, signaling that no betrayal, no matter how subtle, would escape his notice. By the end of these calculated campaigns, Æthelstan had effectively dismantled the fragmented rule of the anglo-saxon kingdoms. Rivals were either subdued, allied, or erased from power. England, once a patchwork of competing kingships, began to coalesce under a single crown. But this unity came at a cost. Secrets, betrayals, and blood spilled in the shadows laid the foundation for a kingdom that would endure for centuries. Æthelstan's mastery of both overt and hidden power ensured that his reign was not only recognized, but feared and respected. A reign whose story, even today, whispers from the shadows of history. Imagine the Cathedral of Kingston upon Thames in the early morning, fog swirling around its towers. The air is thick with incense, candlelight flickering across stone walls, and a hush falling over nobles, priests, and soldiers alike. Æthelstan, dressed in robes of gold and crimson, steps toward the altar. But this was no ordinary coronation. Every movement, every glance seemed steeped in secrecy and ancient symbolism. Witnesses later described a ceremony that felt both divine and unnervingly mysterious, as if the crown itself carried a hidden power, one written long before Æthelstan's birth. The prophecy that had followed Æthelstan for years now seemed to converge in this moment. Monks had long spoken of visions and dreams, celestial lights, birds flying in precise patterns, and a child destined to unite all England. Some historians believe these omens were exaggerated, yet chroniclers insisted that the sky above Kingston shone unnaturally bright the morning of his coronation, despite storm clouds elsewhere. Candles flickered without wind. A falcon circled overhead, disappearing as suddenly as it appeared. To the people watching, these signs confirmed that Æthelstan was not just a king, he was the fulfillment of a long-held destiny. Few could see what happened behind the altar. Secret rituals conducted by monks in the shadows reportedly involved relics from far-off lands, inscriptions of Latin prayers, and symbols drawn in patterns meant to invoke divine favor. Some suggest Æthelstan swore oaths not only to his people, but to an unseen power, cementing his rule in ways the world could never fully understand. Doors were closed for hours, witnesses only heard chants echoing, growing in intensity. When the doors opened, the young king emerged with the crown upon his head, pale yet unwavering, as if he had glimpsed a truth that none of the spectators could comprehend. This was more than a ceremony, it was a performance designed to solidify both perception and power. The crown itself, forged in gold and studded with gems, was said to bear secret engravings, tiny symbols invoking divine protection and authority. To those who looked closely, the crown seemed almost alive, reflecting the light in ways that suggested hidden meanings. Æthelstan's coronation was a masterstroke of symbolism. The people saw a king blessed by God, while rivals and enemies sensed a subtle warning. This ruler was both chosen and untouchable, a man whose authority was backed by forces beyond the ordinary. As Æthelstan left the cathedral, the fog outside seemed to retreat, revealing a kingdom poised for unification. The coronation had not only crowned a king, but cast a spell of legitimacy over his rule. Allies would follow him, enemies would hesitate, and the first threads of a united England began to take hold. Yet behind the triumph lay questions unanswered. What exactly transpired during the hours behind the altar? Were these rituals divine, symbolic, or the manipulation of a cunning young king? The mystery of Æthelstan's coronation would echo for centuries, a reminder that power is not just claimed, it is forged, shadow by shadow, in moments that the world only partially sees. Imagine walking through the streets of early 10th century England at dusk, the mist clinging to cobblestones, flickering torchlight casting shadows on timbered homes. Æthelstan, newly crowned, was no longer just a prince guided by prophecy. He was a king responsible for a kingdom fractured by centuries of rivalry. The challenge before him was immense: to impose law and order over a land where loyalty was fleeting and justice was often a weapon rather than a shield. But Æthelstan's approach was as cunning as it was mysterious, blending fear, faith, and calculated authority. Æthelstan understood that law was more than rules written on parchment. It was a tool of power. He issued decrees that unified disparate regions, standardizing punishments and privileges in ways never seen before. Theft, murder, and rebellion were no longer crimes judged solely by local lords. they became matters for the crown. Yet Æthelstan often acted through intermediaries, shadowy officials and loyal monks, whose decisions carried his authority but left little trace. In this way, the king's hand was everywhere, though seldom seen, and the people of England began to feel the silent weight of his justice. Some laws Æthelstan enforced were public and ceremonial, designed to impress and intimidate. Others were secretive, targeting rivals, traitors, and disloyal nobles without leaving evidence. Chroniclers hint at hidden trials held in private chambers, oaths sworn in darkness, and sentences carried out quietly to prevent unrest. In some cases, entire villages were forced to comply, not through open battle, but through the subtle manipulation of fear and loyalty. Æthelstan's approach to justice was strategic. He understood that ruling by perception was often more effective than ruling by sword alone. The king also relied on the church to enforce moral authority. Monks and abbots became his eyes and ears, reporting on disputes, unfaithful servants, and rebellious lords. Æthelstan encouraged religious leaders to publicly support his decrees while quietly observing those who might undermine him. Through this careful blending of sacred authority and royal power, the young king created a system where law, order, and justice were inseparable, and where the line between fairness and fear was often intentionally blurred. By the end of his early reign, Æthelstan had imposed a fragile but effective order over a fractured England. His laws did more than prevent chaos. They consolidated his authority, established his reputation as a ruler of foresight, and cemented his image as a king whose justice was both feared and respected. Yet beneath the visible order, the shadows of secret councils, hidden punishments, and silent oaths persisted. Æthelstan's legacy was not merely one of law and governance, but of a subtle mastery over human behavior, a reign where power was reinforced not just by crowns and armies, but by the unseen mechanisms of justice that few dared to question. Close your eyes and picture a wind-swept battlefield in northern England. The mist clings to the earth, and the cries of soldiers echo across the hills. This was the stage for Æthelstan's most legendary clash, the Battle of Brunanburh. Here he faced an alliance of rival kings, Scots, Vikings, and Strathclyde warriors, united against his vision of a single England. What made this war legendary wasn't just the scale of the battle, but the shadows of strategy, prophecy, and unseen forces that seemed to guide every move. Æthelstan didn't charge blindly into conflict. Months before the battle, he moved spies and scouts, observing the terrain, the enemy's numbers, and weaknesses in their alliances. Chronicles hint at secret signals and coded messages exchanged among his generals, designed to sow confusion among the enemy. While the opposing kings believed they were converging to crush one man's claim, Æthelstan had already set the stage for a masterstroke. To him, Brunanburh wasn't just a fight, it was a carefully choreographed orchestration of fear, timing, and calculated violence. Even the battle lines concealed mysteries. Some of Æthelstan's most loyal warriors were hidden on the flanks, waiting for a moment to strike. Viking allies, previously bound through treaties and oaths, appeared when the tide threatened to turn, cutting off retreat and turning chaos into victory. Chroniclers describe the battlefield as almost theatrical, banners waving, swords glinting, yet every move seemed preordained, a silent testament to Æthelstan's meticulous planning. Every victory was deliberate, every maneuver calculated to maximize impact and minimize unnecessary bloodshed among his own forces. Though victorious, the Battle of Brunanburh exacted a terrible toll. Thousands of soldiers on both sides were slain, the ground soaked with blood, the cries of the dying carried across the hills. Yet for Æthelstan, this was not merely a physical victory, It was the solidification of his vision of a united England. The deaths of rival kings and nobles removed threats to his authority, while surviving allies were bound ever tighter through shared triumph and fear. Even so, the shadows of prophecy lingered. Some whispered that the battle was foretold, that a chosen king would emerge from the carnage, guided by destiny, to unite the land. When the dust settled, Æthelstan emerged not just as a victor, but as a symbol, a king whose name echoed across kingdoms near and far. Brunanburh became more than a battle. It became legend, sung by poets and chronicled in Latin verse. Yet mysteries persisted. Where exactly the battle took place, the full strategies employed, and the secret alliances that turned the tide remain partially obscured, lost in the fog of time. For Æthelstan, Brunanburh was both a triumph and a reminder. To unify England, he would need more than armies. He would need cunning, foresight, and the ability to wield shadow and perception as skillfully as he wielded the sword. Imagine stepping quietly into Æthelstan's royal hall at dusk, long after the public crowds have dispersed. Torches flicker, casting shadows along stone walls, and the air hums with whispered conversations. This is the side of kingship the people rarely see. The court of secrets, where power is exercised not in proclamations, but in subtle manipulations, careful alliances, and silent influence. Æthelstan's throne was not merely a seat of gold. It was a command center for intelligence, strategy, and the hidden hand that guided England. At the heart of this court were his closest advisors, men and women whose loyalty was measured not only by oath, but by their ability to navigate secrecy. Some were monks versed in prophecy and ritual, others were warriors skilled in reading both battlefields and political intrigue. Æthelstan understood that true power comes from knowledge hidden from prying eyes. Decisions that appeared simple to the public were often the result of hours of secret deliberation, a chess game played in whispered council rather than open debate. The Court of Secrets also served as a hub for intelligence. Æthelstan relied on messengers disguised as merchants, spies embedded in distant kingdoms, and scouts who returned with coded reports of rival activities. Every whisper, every rumor was evaluated carefully. Some were encouraged, others silenced. By controlling the flow of information, Æthelstan not only stayed ahead of his rivals, but also cultivated an aura of omniscience. The impression that the king knew all, saw all, and acted decisively even when no one else understood the reasoning. Within the court, loyalty was never assumed, it was shaped. Nobles were tested, alliances weighed, and subtle threats conveyed in gestures, words, or veiled warnings. Æthelstan often rewarded service in ways that reinforced obedience, gifts, lands, titles, while hinting at consequences for disloyalty without overtly threatening. In this way, fear and respect coexisted, and the king became a master of perception. Outsiders saw a strong, decisive ruler. Insiders knew he was always calculating, always aware, and always several steps ahead. Through this web of secrecy, Æthelstan transformed England into a kingdom held together not just by armies, but by intelligence, strategy, and perception. His court became a living mechanism operating quietly, efficiently, and invisibly to the public eye. Power was exercised in whispers as much as in proclamations. Influence moved through hidden channels as much as through official edicts. Æthelstan's reign demonstrates that a true king is not only one who conquers the battlefield, but one who masters the shadows behind the throne, shaping loyalty, fear, and destiny in equal measure. Picture walking through a quiet town in 10th century England, cobblestones slick with evening dew. People whisper, glancing at the king's guards and the shadowy figures who patrol unseen corners. Aethelstan's authority extended beyond the visible, through laws that were enforced quietly, decisively, and often without public ceremony. This was a form of control few noticed but all respected, a power exercised in shadow, ensuring loyalty, obedience, and fear across his growing kingdom. Aethelstan's decrees were crafted with precision, covering not just crime, but moral behavior, property disputes, and even social conduct. But the enforcement of these laws was where the true mastery lay. Monks, spies, and loyal agents monitored compliance, often reporting incidents directly to the king or his trusted advisors. Punishments were applied strategically, sometimes publicly, sometimes in secret, depending on the message he wanted to send. The people began to understand breaking the law wasn't just a civic error. It was a risk that might be noticed by unseen eyes at any moment. In Æthelstan's England, justice was as much about perception as about fairness. Secret investigations could decide the fate of nobles, merchants, and even distant allies. The king's hand seemed everywhere, yet few could trace it. Chronicles hint at trials conducted in private chambers, oaths sworn in darkness, and sentences that left no evidence for the common eye. By blending visible rulings with covert enforcement, Æthelstan ensured that fear, respect, and obedience moved through the kingdom as naturally as sunlight through a window. Some punishments were subtle: exile, loss of privileges, or reassignment of lands. Others were dramatic, serving as warnings to those who dared defy him openly. Yet, Æthelstan's genius was in balancing severity with mercy, ensuring that consequences reinforced his authority without sparking rebellion. Secret records hint that he sometimes allowed minor infractions to go unpunished to test loyalty or mislead rival observers. Every decision, public or hidden, reinforced the idea that Æthelstan's reach was inescapable. Through these shadowed laws, Æthelstan consolidated power in a kingdom still fractured by centuries of rival kingships. His rule became not only about armies or ceremonies, but about control over thought, perception, and behavior. The ordinary citizen may have seen only the public face of the king, but those who watched more closely realized that Æthelstan's authority extended into the unseen, shaping loyalty, fear, and order with a hand both invisible and unbreakable. In this way, England became more than a kingdom. It became a realm held together by laws enforced not just in sight, but in shadow. Picture a dimly lit chapel, flickering candles reflecting off gilded reliquaries, the air thick with incense. Æthelstan, young but resolute, walks among the sacred relics collected from monasteries and distant lands. To the common eye, these objects were symbols of faith: bones of saints, fragments of crosses, or holy manuscripts. But Æthelstan knew they were more than that. In his hands, relics became instruments of influence, tools to solidify loyalty, intimidate rivals, and weave a sense of divine authority around his reign. Relics carried stories of miracles, blessings, and divine favor. Æthelstan understood that perception was as powerful as reality. By displaying certain relics at key moments, coronations, treaties, or campaigns, he implied that God himself sanctioned his rule. Nobles, clergy, and even commoners were reminded that defiance was not only political, but spiritual. Chroniclers hint that some relics were strategically revealed during private councils, reinforcing alliances or subtly warning rivals that Æthelstan's authority was backed by forces unseen yet undeniable. Æthelstan's use of relics extended beyond public display. Monks and abbots, carefully chosen, safeguarded them while providing counsel steeped in prophecy and scripture. Some relics were carried during campaigns, both as talismans and as psychological tools to demoralize enemies. There are whispers that certain negotiations hinged on the presence of these sacred objects, their very aura lending weight to treaties and oaths. Through relics, Æthelstan intertwined politics and religion, ensuring that loyalty was not only enforced, but sanctified. Stories of relics working miracles, whether healing the sick or averting disasters, were sometimes encouraged or exaggerated. Æthelstan's chroniclers recorded events in ways that blurred fact and legend, enhancing the aura surrounding him. Rivals might see only a man. Those loyal to him felt the divine undercurrent of his power. The king's subtle manipulation of sacred artifacts turned devotion into political leverage, creating a realm where faith and obedience became inseparable. His enemies could question his authority in court or on the battlefield, but few dared to challenge the spiritual weight he carried. By carefully blending religion, relics, and political acumen, Æthelstan shaped a kingdom held together not only by armies or law, but by belief and perception. Sacred objects became silent enforcers of authority, reinforcing loyalty, intimidation, and awe in equal measure. In the shadows of his reign, the ordinary citizen may have seen only a devout king. The insiders knew he was a master strategist, wielding divine symbolism as deftly as any sword. Æthelstan's use of relics ensured that England was united not just in territory, but in allegiance to a king whose power was sanctified, mysterious, and enduring. Picture a quiet hall in the royal palace, torches flickering along stone walls. Æthelstan walks among advisors and nobles, yet his mind is not on gold or swords. It is on alliances, forged not in battle, but in marriage. For a king seeking to unite England, marriages were more than love. They were instruments of diplomacy, silent tools wielded in shadow to secure loyalty, weaken rivals, and bind kingdoms together without spilling blood. Behind closed doors, Æthelstan orchestrated connections that would ripple across generations, shaping the destiny of his reign and the future of England. Every union Æthelstan arranged carried layers of strategy. Daughters of powerful nobles married to distant allies, foreign princesses brought into the court, and even cousins or distant relatives were paired to maintain loyalty within the royal family. These marriages were carefully timed, sometimes announced publicly, often negotiated in secret. Chroniclers hint that Æthelstan's envoys traveled far and wide, carrying letters and gifts that were not merely tokens, but subtle instruments of persuasion. Each marriage strengthened a bond, but also carried hidden expectations, a silent contract that intertwined family, politics, and power. Yet marriage was never without risk. Secret rivalries and jealousy simmered in courts and households, often threatening to undo the careful planning behind these unions. Some marriages produced heirs who were seen as threats by other nobles. Others were childless, leaving fragile alliances vulnerable. Æthelstan understood the delicate balance. A king had to cultivate loyalty without creating resentment. Behind every veil and ceremonial blessing, subtle warnings and expectations were communicated, ensuring that marriage served both family and kingdom, weaving personal lives into the complex tapestry of political strategy. Beyond family connections, Æthelstan's marriages were also tools to secure foreign alliances. Princesses and princes from neighboring kingdoms were brought into England, creating bonds that were as diplomatic as they were personal. Gifts, feasts, and religious ceremonies accompanied these unions, reinforcing the sacred and political weight of each marriage. The king's hand was present in every decision, guiding his court, his family, and his allies toward stability and loyalty, while keeping the full extent of strategy invisible to the public eye. Every alliance strengthened England's unity, yet concealed subtle messages of control and foresight. Through these shadowed marriages, Æthelstan molded a network of loyalty and influence that extended far beyond his immediate court. England became more than a collection of regions. It became a realm tied together by bloodlines, loyalty, and the subtle power of dynastic strategy. To the outside observer, these unions seemed ceremonial or customary, yet the real force was hidden, silent, deliberate, and immensely powerful. Æthelstan's reign demonstrates that true authority often flows not from armies or crowns alone, but from the unseen threads of family, alliance, and the secrets whispered behind palace walls. Picture the flicker of torchlight along the stone walls of Æthelstan's palace as shadows twist and lengthen. Behind every ornate curtain, whispers hide plots and eyes watch from secret alcoves. The king's court was more than a seat of ceremony. It was a labyrinth of intrigue, a place where loyalty could shift like smoke, and danger lurked in even the most familiar faces. Æthelstan knew that ruling England meant navigating not only armies and allies, but also the hidden threats that moved silently through corridors, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Spies, informants, and even servants often doubled as eyes for rival nobles or foreign kingdoms. Æthelstan had to remain vigilant at all times. Letters intercepted in shadows, subtle gestures in council meetings, or sudden disappearances were all signs of potential threats. Some rumors hinted at assassins disguised as merchants or monks, slipping silently into the king's inner chambers. For Æthelstan, understanding the game of shadows was as vital as commanding soldiers on the battlefield. One wrong move could cost more than territory. It could cost life itself. Intrigue in Æthelstan's court was often subtle. Rival nobles might publicly swear loyalty while secretly undermining policies, whispering dissent, or bribing allies. Some threats were even familial, with distant relatives coveting power or questioning the legitimacy of his rule. The king had to cultivate intuition, decipher coded messages, and anticipate betrayals before they escalated. Chronicles suggest that he sometimes staged tests of loyalty, observing reactions to misinformation or secret trials designed to expose hidden conspiracies. Every maneuver reinforced his awareness and the aura of control surrounding his reign. Assassins and murder plots were perhaps the darkest elements of Æthelstan's court. Chroniclers hint at unnamed figures vanishing or being found dead in strange circumstances, their stories obscured by deliberate secrecy. Some plots were intercepted by loyal advisors before reaching the king. Others were deterred by carefully placed threats or displays of power. Æthelstan's ability to navigate these veiled dangers strengthened both his authority and his reputation. Those who opposed him publicly or secretly were reminded that loyalty was not just expected, it was monitored, enforced, and sometimes fatal if violated. Through vigilance, strategy, and subtle manipulation, Æthelstan maintained control over a court rife with danger. The throne he occupied was as much a center of mystery and intrigue as it was a symbol of sovereignty. Every whispered threat, hidden plan, and shadowed assassin reinforced a kingdom held together not solely by armies or laws, but by perception, foresight, and the invisible hand of a king who understood that power often lives in the spaces between sight and shadow. Æthelstan's reign was a testament to the idea that surviving in a world of veiled threats required as much cunning as courage. A kingdom protected by the unseen, ruled by a master of shadows. Imagine a candle-lit chamber deep within Æthelstan's palace, walls lined with maps and letters from distant lands. Envoys whisper in low tones, delivering messages cloaked in secrecy. Spies slip silently through city streets and foreign ports, bringing intelligence that only the king may read. Æthelstan's power extended far beyond the battlefield. He ruled not only through armies, laws, or religious authority, but through an intricate web of silent diplomacy, hidden alliances, and unseen observers. In many ways, the real strength of England lay not in swords, but in shadows. Æthelstan's envoys were not just messengers, they were instruments of subtle influence. Disguised as traders or pilgrims, they delivered secret instructions, forged alliances, and even tested the loyalty of foreign rulers. Every gift they carried, every word they spoke, was carefully calibrated to convey power, respect, or veiled threats. Some envoys returned with coded responses, their letters written in cipher or in obscure runes, ensuring that only the king and his most trusted advisors could decipher the true meaning. Æthelstan's diplomacy was a game of perception, where information flowed silently and alliances shifted in whispers. Meanwhile, spies operated like ghosts in the shadows. Merchants, monks, and travelers often served double duty, reporting on rivals' movements, intentions, and potential threats. Some spies infiltrated rival courts, gathering secrets that could prevent war or expose treachery. Chronicles suggest that Æthelstan maintained an elaborate network of intelligence across England and neighboring kingdoms, allowing him to anticipate danger before it reached his borders. Through this unseen network, he turned knowledge into power, using information to manipulate rivals, secure allies, and maintain a level of control that few could imagine. Alliances forged through these channels were subtle yet potent. Foreign rulers who might have opposed him were persuaded through gifts, oaths, and strategic marriages, often negotiated in secrecy. Some agreements were verbal, sealed by sacred rituals or symbolic acts rather than written contracts, so that betrayal carried spiritual as well as political consequences. By maintaining these silent alliances, Æthelstan ensured that England could expand influence and stability without always resorting to open warfare. His reign demonstrates that the most enduring bonds are sometimes those carefully hidden from public view. Through envoys, spies, and secret alliances, Æthelstan wove a network that extended across England and beyond, creating a kingdom held together not solely by swords or law, but by information, perception, and trust earned or enforced in shadows. Rivals never knew which messages were genuine and which were traps. Allies never fully knew when loyalty was being tested. In this delicate balance, Æthelstan thrived. His diplomacy, largely invisible to the common eye, became the backbone of a reign that would shape the future of England, proving that the quietest moves often wield the greatest power. Picture the bustling markets of 10th century England, torchlight glinting off coins and the chatter of merchants filling the air. But beyond the visible trade and the clink of silver lay a kingdom shaped by invisible hands. Æthelstan understood that wealth was not merely a tool of prosperity. It was a weapon, a means of control, and a silent language of power. Through taxes, tributes, and strategic distribution of resources, he built not just a treasury, but a network of influence that bound nobles, allies, and even rivals to his will. Æthelstan received tribute from local lords and foreign rulers alike. But these payments were rarely simple exchanges of wealth. They were carefully monitored indicators of loyalty, obedience, and political alignment. Excessive tribute might signal submission, while reluctance hinted at rebellion. By regulating what was collected, how it was collected, and how it was distributed, Æthelstan could subtly reward allies, punish defiance, and send messages across the kingdom without raising a sword. The flow of wealth itself became a form of diplomacy, silent yet profoundly effective. Beyond tribute, Æthelstan's control extended to the kingdom's economy. Coinage was standardized, trade routes protected, and markets regulated. Merchants who prospered often did so under the watchful eyes of royal officials, while those suspected of undermining authority faced restrictions. Chronicles suggest that Æthelstan understood the psychological power of wealth. Prosperity encouraged loyalty, scarcity bred compliance, and the perception of royal oversight ensured that both peasants and nobles internalized the king's authority. In this way, economics became a subtle but formidable tool of governance. The king also used wealth to cement alliances beyond England's borders. Gifts of gold, silver, and finely crafted goods were sent to neighboring rulers, Viking leaders, and foreign princes. Sometimes these gifts carried symbolic meaning, a reminder of favor or a veiled warning of consequences. Coupled with covert financial incentives, bribes, or rewards, Æthelstan's approach ensured that loyalty could be bought, or at least reinforced, without open confrontation. Wealth became a silent glue, connecting him to allies and creating invisible threads of influence that few could trace. Through the careful management of tribute, economic policy, and strategic generosity, Æthelstan controlled England as much through money as through law, sword, or religion. His reign demonstrates that power often lies not in what the people see, but in what they cannot. The quiet movement of resources, the subtle enforcement of obligation, and the unseen influence that wealth can wield. England's unity, stability, and allegiance to Æthelstan were forged not just in battlefields or council chambers, but through the silent, invisible mechanisms of hidden wealth. In these shadows, the king's authority extended far beyond sight, shaping the destiny of a kingdom with every coin that passed through his hands. Picture Æthelstan sitting alone in a dimly lit chamber, the flicker of a single candle reflecting in his eyes. Outside, the kingdom hums with activity, but inside, the king contemplates a threat unlike any battlefield or rebellion: the future of his crown. Succession was more than a matter of inheritance. It was a shadowy realm of intrigue, rivalries, and subtle manipulations. For Æthelstan, ensuring the continuity of his line and the stability of England required foresight, cunning, and a mastery of the human heart, as much as of law and war. Heirs were more than children. They were symbols of legitimacy and tools of diplomacy. Æthelstan's offspring, whether sons or daughters, were observed and guided carefully, their education, alliances, and even movements orchestrated to strengthen the king's legacy. Rival claims, both within and outside the family, were quietly monitored. Advisors whispered of potential challenges, distant cousins, and ambitious nobles who might use any perceived weakness to stake their claim. Æthelstan understood that succession was never guaranteed. It had to be actively managed, protected, and sometimes manipulated. Rivalries extended beyond the royal family. Nobles who had gained power under his rule might see succession as an opportunity to advance their own agendas. Some could plot alliances with foreign powers, hoping to install a pliable ruler, or sow discord. Æthelstan's court became a web of observation, negotiation, and subtle intimidation. Private meetings, coded messages, and secret tests of loyalty ensured that he remained several steps ahead of any potential rival. In this shadowed world, the king's authority relied as much on perception and intelligence as on any sword or law. The king also used strategic marriages and alliances to safeguard succession. Children were betrothed to foreign royalty or important nobles, weaving a network of protection and influence that extended beyond England's borders. Prophecies, religious ceremonies, and public displays of legitimacy reinforced the perception that Æthelstan's heirs were divinely sanctioned. These measures, while often hidden from the common eye, ensured that the crown remained secure, that rivals hesitated, and that the future of England was subtly shaped by the king's foresight. Through vigilance, careful planning, and subtle manipulation, Æthelstan transformed succession from a potential threat into a mechanism of stability. England's future was held together not only by armies or law, but by the unseen threads of loyalty, foresight, and strategic foresight. Rivals could plan, nobles could scheme, but the king's hand moved invisibly, guiding the destiny of both his heirs and his kingdom. In this way, Æthelstan ensured that his legacy and the unity of England would endure, forged in shadow, protected by intelligence, and shaped by a vision only he fully understood. Picture the evening sky over England, the sun dipping behind hills and rivers glinting like molten gold. Æthelstan's reign had ended, yet the echoes of his rule lingered in every corner of the kingdom. Cities, towns, and monasteries bore silent witness to a king who had united lands once divided, who had ruled not only through armies and law, but through shadows, strategy, and subtle influence. His legacy was not written solely in battles or laws, but in the unseen forces that shaped loyalty, fear, and the very fabric of a nation. Æthelstan's authority had been woven through hidden councils, silent enforcement, and strategic diplomacy. Allies were bound by oaths, rivals watched and tested, and the kingdom's wealth, laws, and faith were instruments of quiet power. Chroniclers spoke in hushed tones of the king's foresight, his ability to anticipate rebellion, and his use of both visible and invisible mechanisms to maintain control. England had become more than a collection of regions. It was a single, united entity, held together by threads of influence and perception that few ever noticed. Stories of Æthelstan's reign grew into legend, yet the most powerful aspects remained invisible. The coronation shrouded in prophecy, the secret marriages, the hidden laws, and the silent alliances. These were the elements that truly shaped England. Poets, monks, and chroniclers recorded battles and triumphs, yet even centuries later, historians still debate the full extent of his subtle strategies. What is remembered openly is only half the story. The other half resides in the shadows, where he maneuvered, manipulated, and mastered the art of kingship. Æthelstan's greatest achievement was not merely unification, but the establishment of a system of governance that could endure beyond his reign. Laws, wealth, diplomacy, and religion were all carefully aligned to reinforce authority, ensure loyalty, and minimize threats. The kingdom he left behind was stronger, more cohesive, and more aware of the unseen threads of power that held it together. Every decision he made, visible or hidden, contributed to a legacy that would influence English monarchy for generations to come. As night falls over England, one can almost imagine Æthelstan walking through silent corridors of power, watching over the nation he forged from fragmentation. His reign reminds us that true power often exists beyond sight, in whispers, secrets, and strategic insight. Æthelstan's legacy is a testament to the quiet mastery of influence, the shaping of a nation through intellect, foresight, and shadow. England as we know it began in part because of a king who understood that the most enduring forces are often the invisible ones, guiding history from the unseen corners of the world. Picture the evening sky over England, the sun dipping behind hills and rivers glinting like molten gold. Æthelstan's reign had ended, yet the echoes of his rule lingered in every corner of the kingdom. Cities, towns, and monasteries bore silent witness to a king who had united lands once divided, who had ruled not only through armies and law, but through shadows, strategy, and subtle influence. His legacy was not written solely in battles or laws, but in the unseen forces that shaped loyalty, fear, and the very fabric of a nation. Æthelstan's authority had been woven through hidden councils, silent enforcement, and strategic diplomacy. Allies were bound by oaths, rivals watched and tested, and the kingdom's wealth, laws, and faith were instruments of quiet power. Chroniclers spoke in hushed tones of the king's foresight, his ability to anticipate rebellion, and his use of both visible and invisible mechanisms to maintain control. England had become more than a collection of regions. It was a single, united entity, held together by threads of influence and perception that few ever noticed. Stories of Æthelstan's reign grew into legend, yet the most powerful aspects remained invisible. The coronation shrouded in prophecy, the secret marriages, the hidden laws, and the silent alliances. These were the elements that truly shaped England. Poets, monks, and chroniclers recorded battles and triumphs, yet even centuries later, historians still debate the full extent of his subtle strategies. What is remembered openly is only half the story. The other half resides in the shadows, where he maneuvered, manipulated, and mastered the art of kingship. Æthelstan's greatest achievement was not merely unification, but the establishment of a system of governance that could endure beyond his reign. Laws, wealth, diplomacy, and religion were all carefully aligned to reinforce authority, ensure loyalty, and minimize threats. The kingdom he left behind was stronger, more cohesive, and more aware of the unseen threads of power that held it together. Every decision he made, visible or hidden, contributed to a legacy that would influence English monarchy for generations to come. As night falls over England, one can almost imagine Æthelstan walking through silent corridors of power, watching over the nation he forged from fragmentation. His reign reminds us that true power often exists beyond sight, in whispers, secrets, and strategic insight. Æthelstan's legacy is a testament to the quiet mastery of influence, the shaping of a nation through intellect, foresight, and shadow. England as we know it began in part because of a king who understood that the most enduring forces are often the invisible ones, guiding history from the unseen corners of the world.